All right. Hopefully everyone is well caffeinated for an invigorating discussion on DA. I think we had some really good overview talks. I'm quickly going to blow through a few slides I put together sort of as a leading conversation starters and maybe some questions I want to ask to try to get things started. So go ahead to the next slide, please. I'm only putting this up. It's a recap of some stuff I already said, but I want to in particular show you some numbers in terms of the huge investment we're making in EMC to make JEDI happen. On the global side, this is actually probably an underestimate. We have partially 5 feds and over 15 contractors now working on it, and this is multiple years in the making in addition to collaborators at other centers like PSL. This is a huge investment that is being made to make this happen. We're starting to do this on the regional side as well. We have 2 feds and 4 contractors working partial, some full-time, on starting to build JEDI components to be enabled for RFS. We need to figure out what the right size is going to be to make HAFS happen, depending on how we define how it's going to look. Next slide, please. Abichal already showed this, so I'm not going to dwell on it. Let's go ahead to the next slide. What I really wanted to touch on is sort of the lessons learned and some of the pain points we've experienced over the past several years in figuring out how to contribute to JEDI and make it happen. So just no particular order set of things to consider. JEDI is not something you can do in your spare time. It's not something you can do, spend Fridays toying around with, contribute when you feel like it. It is a rapidly moving freight train being rapidly developed. If you even take a few weeks off, or if you're not paying attention, you'll be left behind. Part of this is just because of where it is in the stage of the development. It's really sort of rapid development phase. You have to be involved regularly. We now have our team coming in the office twice a week. I lock them in a room and ask them to work on JEDI. It's one way to sort of force them to the interaction and sort of self-learning and learning together. I say force sort of jokingly, of course. They're really motivated to do this, and it's really helped them to sort of work with each other and help each other through some of the pain points as we build this out. This isn't a black box as much as JEDI is being promised to solve world hunger, or however you want to phrase it. It's still a software system. It has complexities. We need developers, not users. So my staff has to get into the weeds. I have very few people that can do good programming in C++, but there's a lot of object-oriented software in C++ under the hood, and we still have to know how some of the stuff is working, not only to do the development, but if this is going to be implemented, my staff is the one that's getting a phone call from NCO when something breaks, and we have to figure out how to debug and fix it. So we need people getting their hands dirty, and soon, as things are being developed, if this thing is ever going to become operational. One good thing, and I think maybe it wasn't so clear, but the generic aspects of the code and focusing on the genericity has already paid dividends. We wouldn't be as far along on the ocean, land, aerosol components of JEDI-based DA if this wasn't sort of the philosophy of the infrastructure itself. So the adaptability to plug and play things across different applications is a big deal. And this is actually even true for GSI, the mentality that you can go in your corner and work on something for a year and put it back in a repository. This just isn't going to work. You have to be at the ground level with a regular cadence, seeing what's happening as things move along. We have to be more agile. So incremental changes more quickly, interacting with issues in the repositories on a regular basis. This is the only way that we're going to be able to succeed. This has been a huge cultural shift even for our staff. Just getting in this mindset that this thing is evolving and changing so rapidly, and things are breaking on each PC on a weekly basis that we have to keep debugging and re-engineering. Next slide. So this was borrowed actually from a document that was put together from the HAFS leadership team. I think John touched on some good scientific issues. Some others were teased out through the talks. And this isn't to say I approve this list. This is really just sort of a synthesis and talking points as a starting point. What I really want to get to is the next slide. To the discussion. So I always get asked, when is JEDI going to be ready? And I already made my flippant comment about it. Well, it'll be ready when we make it ready. And by we, I mean the community. The transition and integration of JEDI was not an EMC decision. This was both a NOAA and community decision. So we need help. If people are waiting for EMC to develop a system to deliver to the community, we're going to have a problem because it can be done, but it's going to take a long time. I have finite resources. Everyone has finite resources. So we need buy-in across the board. The other thing that we're having difficulty doing, and this is even true with my staff, we're going to have to make some tough decisions about redirecting resources and stopping some short-term things to focus on the longer term. We've done this in the global to some extent. We're starting to do it for the regional. We're going to have to do this for HAFS as well. So what are we going to stop so that we can invest resources in making this happen for HAFS? How can we leverage the things happening across the other applications, so for the global and for the regional, focusing on DA science priorities for HAFS that are unique? I think there's actually some discussion to be had. So in an environment where there's finite resources, where should we direct them? What should our science priorities be that will have the most payoff for HAFS? I guess one question I keep coming back to is figuring out how to get from where we are now to the vision for integration of moving nests in the global system, and what is the future of this domain-centric basin scale system, because this has implications for decisions we're going to make about the data simulation. Data simulation doesn't exist in a vacuum. It interacts with all components of the model. So it's decisions made about the modeling system and configuration itself impact the data simulation and vice versa. So we need to work on this hand in hand iteratively. There's going to be some stuff that has to be decided soon because it is going to impact sort of our development priorities longer term. Finally, one thing I've asked internally to my team, there's dependence on GFS and GDES now. Sometimes that's good. Obviously, we've seen some times where that's a problem. I think one thing that would be useful to us in the event where we don't have HAFS as an independent system, what requirements or improvements would be beneficial if we could add them to the GFS and GDES? What if we had higher resolution ensemble or an hourly updating global system? Or what would the priorities be for the global system to help improve hurricane assimilation? And I think with that, and remembering back to the presentations, I want to open the floor and hopefully people have plenty of comments or questions.
Thank you, Daryl. I think this is long overdue. My perspective, watching HAFS evolve in a piecemeal way. Yes, it seems like it happened pretty quick, but it was piecemeal. We're still piecemeal. Our physics and affects our DA, our model decisions affect our DA. We've seen the most gains from the improvement of using data in the last 5 to 10 years. And my opinion is, flip a question around that you asked. What would be the best solution in moving forward, say, going from a storm-centric to, say, a basin-centric to the DA system, and suspending physics changes while we make these improvements? In other words, instead of testing physics every year, let's do a dedicated push to get JEDI linked in and then look at physics, because then you're linking the GFS efforts and anything we do with the regional. I mean, I think those are really key issues that we have to think about. And I think the community should think about it instead of just saying, oh, well, we can have multiple nests and we can have, you know, we'll go to Thompson and we'll go to this physics and that physics, when really the big issue is, how does it all link up to the DA? Is the DA the priority? I think it should be. That as we move forward, that the modeling and the DA are in sync and not one chasing the other like we have been. That's my opinion. Of course, I'm retired, so I can say anything I want.
Yeah. I wouldn't fully agree with Frank. The reason that I wouldn't agree is that these are developments basically, and then we don't want to jeopardize forecast improvements versus, for example, Lee had a problem, and we need to address forecasters' needs basically to improve the model in the first place. That could, the lower hanging fruit to start with is the physics and the dynamics which we are aware of. So development, I think both should go in hand basically, and how do we get to help you is going to be the question here, I guess, to develop the JEDI or EMC to develop that gaps basically. we are in shoestring anyway. What do you give up from a shoestring? Because the reason that I'm saying we are in shoestring is because most of the developments that we have done is through the supplemental projects, basically, which we pulled in some here and there, and the supplemental is getting over. So how do we commit to a developmental project as well as putting efforts in improving the model further? HAFS 1.0 is the same, it's better than HWARP, but then this is the starting point. So I agree with Frank, what he's saying, that we need to have, when we start it, we need to start, but then the resources is going to be the question that we need to address, Frank.
To follow this a little bit, I somewhat agree with Frank. Yeah. I think in the future, the physical ability will be not like in the past, as fast as in the past. We have to test in all the UFS applications. And that's actually provide the opportunity to work on the DA. So not everyone has to just kill the physics to days every day. That's just my comment.
I guess one thing I'll reply to Gopal's comment is JEDI transition doesn't have to be viewed strictly as an infrastructure transition. There's no reason we have to implement JEDI to replicate what we do now in HAFS with GSI. It can be anything we envision it to be. We can set the priorities for JEDI for HAFS, whatever version it's going to be. It could be, some of the stuff John presented or stuff that Xu Guang's presenting. There's no reason that we have to have boundary conditions in terms of, these are the things we have to do because we do them now. We can imagine it to be whatever we want it to be. We just have to make sure that if there are things we need down the pike, that we make sure they're identified as a priority now, so that we don't end up 2 years from now that, 2 years ago we should have done X, Y, and Z with the infrastructure to enable it in the future. I mean, one example is we're pushing to implement a serial filter in JEDI to then enable expanding to particle filters and other more forward-looking science. These are viable things that we can include when we talk about the next generation infrastructure. JEDI is being pursued to enable these kinds of things. It's not being pursued just to re-engineer and replace GSI.
Yeah, I'll take another perspective. To go back to my talk yesterday, I'm thinking like Fred Tepper. We need a capacity. We need to build a capacity to do DA as well as the model is being done right now. And I don't think we have that. I agree with Daryl that it's not there. We have a handful of people doing DA research that's been funded by supplementals. So we've put a lot of pieces together, but we've not integrated anything. It's not part of the workflow now. And JEDI is the tool that I think we need to look at. The question I would ask is, do we have the HPC resources to do both, which I don't think we do, model developments and DA. I don't think they exist for the research community that come in and helped out here. And this is an issue. How do we do that? We can't afford to do both. So do we do them both on the shoestring or just ignore one and do the other?
Incidentally, I was talking to Portageoy about the same requirements in the afternoon. And what we thought was, for example, I was trying to explore the possibility of using a Bayesian scale for doing a DA, basically. Okay, that's a point well taken. Even for that, we were discussing to run over the Bayesian, which already, John, you might want to correct me. He's already running the Bayesian scale at 3, in the sense for creation of the analysis. Yes, that's a good pathway, Frank.
So one comment I have on that is that, the framework that we're discussing is way easier than we have for the operational DA infrastructure right now. So it would make the transition easier because it's just a conceptually simpler modeling system.
Yeah. And so, John, My comment would be, if we took the simpler approach, let the modelers on their side do what they're doing, but take the simpler approach to get experience with JEDI. But do we still have the capacity internally to do that? Do we have the manpower, the HPC resources? And if we don't, how do we allocate them and get them set up? Do we rob the HRECs and say, hey, we need parts of the jets to do this? Or are we going to do it in the cloud? I mean, we can do anything we want, but we need to make a decision. And I think you're right. If we do the simpler approach.
So, yeah, that's the discussion Gopal and I had was, I mean, I on the DA side, I feel like it's one of these things where if we had a lot more computing resources, we can do way more than what we're doing now. I mean, that's the big restriction.
Actually, continuing on what John said, we had for AOML accounts, we were saying portfolio map, but we use over the year, we use 80%, and Gus was mentioning, and Sujin is aware of this. There are pockets in which we don't even use those HPC resources, and if we can dedicate towards what John is doing or whatever is going to happen to HAFS, I think the HPC problem is only secondary when compared to how do we link all these resources together to put all eggs in one basket. We cannot kill the physics development or infrastructure developments. At the same time, DA should also progress. For that to happen, like what we did to put HAFS together, I think few of these projects which are already doing DA basically may need to come in the same way we develop the HAFS system, and then we can look out for resources. Probably one set of mine. Yeah, here there were 3 or 4 projects that I'm aware of. One already discussed. John is already having, and Chandra is here. Probably that's the JTTI project, right, Chandra? That John is working on.
I should mention all the university, collaborators for HAFS are running a system that somewhat resembles what I mentioned for my talk. I mean, Shuang's group,
Zhuguang, for instance.
Altube, CMIS.
Basically, I just want to mention, Dara already mentioned that within EMC, we already have some internal coordination, started the JDA coordination with the DA group, of course, also the ROOFs team, the HAFS team. We already have some regular JDA transition discussions get started. I think Dara does share the ROOFs transition plan. I think those will be a good example for us as well. Even within our team, I think Gene actually already starting pick up some basic capabilities running JDA-based simple regional DA for HAFS. But starting point. Yes, but I also want to mention what Dara's group right now is doing, prepare their observation data stream, their pre-processing of those data is already something we eventually also need for roofs for HAFS. For those, I think it's ongoing. And glad to hear, actually, you mentioned that's 90% already next week, which will be fantastic. But of course, we need also work for some specific HAFS data for Hurricane.
I think Daryl mentioned this in his talk, showing the manpower that's required and isn't even there yet that for the regional, I think. And if the HAFS is going to become part of JEDI, people are going to have to devote themselves to transition to JEDI, not to doing their own individual research. If the people that are able to do that going to need the bodies to focus on transition and make it happen.
I actually have one quick comment, a question and comment, I guess. So shouldn't someone from like the Joint Center be at meetings like this? I mean, I don't really see them, like at things like HFIP. Given how important this transition is, you'd think they'd have a representative to HFIP, and maybe next year is something to consider.
All right. One, for better or worse, I am the Weather Service representative to the Joint Center Executive Team and Associate Director. Second, Joint Center and I think this has become very obvious as we've continued to evolve, is not just the core staff. Joint Center, by definition, is an interagency MOA for which there is core staff to support the coordination and collaboration. However, a lot of the expertise and stuff that's happening resides with core staff, and your point is well taken. But we also have to reduce our risk. We have to own it. They're not going to deliver something we can operationalize. They're going to deliver components that we can leverage to then get further along. So in some sense, it's as important or more important to have our developers driving this conversation and present, even more so than the core staff. It's really my role to make sure that if there are requirements and needs for HAFS, they have to be identified and presented to Joint Center leadership. And I'm more than happy to take the help and bring requirements to them and make sure they're written down and make sure they're held accountable. Yeah, Shuguang, go ahead.
Hi, just quick comments. I think being mentioned, some HAFS member, Jing, has already started efforts to leveraging some GFS or RFS data transition pieces. It's good, but I also think it's important that we look at this transition of HAFS holistically. So I'm glad to see GFS and GDS and RFS already have transition plan in place. I think we really should develop a similar plan for HAFS, and with close coordination with GFS, data transition, RFS, data transition. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of common pieces from GFS, RFS, data transition HAFS can leverage. So that's my first comment. And my second comment is, we talk about manpower, HPC resources. I think Darryl mentioned a very important point in terms of how do we determine how many manpowers we need or HPC power we need. We really need to work as a group to identify priorities for HAFS first. Once that's identified, then we can determine who is in the best position to work on this and what are the missing manpower we need, and then the HPC power is needed. I think the starting point will be the priorities, and then we go from there to figure out what we need. That's my second comment.
Yeah, good comment, Shuguang. Thank you. Yeah, Jujin, go ahead.
So I think this discussion point, the first point, certainly probably not able to, because related to resource not able to decide by this room. So, but the second point and the third point, we probably need to focus on, discuss, and probably we can come out some decision or recommendation, move forward. Because in terms of the resource and HPC, none of this can decide by this room. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, that's true, Shujin. But we can define the requirements, right? I think that's the first order of business. So the first, and Shuguang actually said it correctly, we need to outline what we think the priorities are, what we can first target, whether it's going the route of maybe exploring particle filters in a static domain, in case of John, or do we approach multi-scale? Those are the kind of things which we need to decide a priori. Then look at what it would take to do those or accomplish those things with JEDI. What kind of FTE effort we need, how much time we would need with those FTEs, and yes, how much HPC we would need. Once we have all of that, and we can call it the transition plan, that's when we socialize it all across NOAA and others. Go to NSF and involve other players who can provide us the HPC resources and maybe even FTE resources. Things are tight, we know, and things are not going to get, any better the way it's looking like. So we will need help from more offices more and explore other avenues, wherever they may be, to get this done. But the first order of business, I wholeheartedly agree, is to lay out those requirements.
Okay,
Yeah, Chelsea, go ahead.
yeah, I think that Rich made a good comments here. So I think the success of the HWRF and the GSI is because we have a GSI there, and all the community work on the GSI, and so all our development can incorporate into the GSI. So as for the JEDA now, because JEDA also have multiple options, so they have 3D INVAR, 4D INVAR, and also LETKF, and also the particle filter John mentioned. So as for the EMC, I think you need to take the leader, and so make the first round of choice and guide the community to put all the efforts to work on something. Try to make the achievement first, and then that will open the door for the community input and everything. So, I mean, I heard the resource issue, HPC issue, and all this, but NOAA actually has some program like JTTA and also the NGGPS, HFIP, and all these programs supports data assimilation development. The only thing is now, so we have too many options, and then we get lost sometime.
Circling back, there were a few comments online. Can we scroll up? I missed Aaron's comment. I think it was about potential help from, oh, Chandra is here. Maybe this is for you. Given limited resources for JEDI within EMC, would it be helpful for JTTI and other relevant entities in WPO to fund internal project efforts in this area?
Okay, okay, I think from the discussion, what I am figuring out is JEDI looks like we are walking a fine line between infrastructure versus transitioning research to operations. So JTTI is about transitioning research to operations. But I think we are talking about a little bit of infrastructure, because that we are missing in JEDI. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm ready to fund transition projects. If you have something JEDI, if you want something to transition to JEDI, I'm ready to fund. But if something JEDI is not ready, then I don't know how can JTTI fund? I mean, Congress has given clear direction. JTTI is for transitioning research, mature research to the operations. JEDI I'm seeing JEDI is an operational system, right, which is not ready yet. So JTTI funds cannot be used to build the infrastructure, but funds can be used to transition to something to JEDI. Is that?
Taking liberties as chair to reply. So that I appreciate that, but alternatively, there are projects being funded for academics to work on data assimilation projects that are supposed to be using JEDI, for which there has not also been alternate funds and additional support functions to enable that. And then what happens is some of our partners come to my staff saying, I can't get X to work on Y. There's no actual support function right now available other than a wiki page, and bugging people that are actually doing the critical core development to make JEDI higher readiness level. I think the support function, whether it's through EPIC or other mechanisms, is something we need to seriously talk about for enabling the community to work on JEDI. Yeah, exactly. And Dev had a comment. Go ahead.
So I think we have a good problem. And I go back to what Frank mentioned, and I think Avichal added to that about the lack of workforce right now and the community. And if I really look around, it's a very limited community. We have not really talked much about MSIs, HBCUs. How do we integrate that into this whole discussion? And I think the environment might be right currently to request HPC to bring in those players and those institutions with a training framework, because access to HPC is going to be one of the factors. And if this is aligned for workforce development, there might be an opportunity here. I mean, this is what we are discussed with DOE, for instance, in the recent times. So maybe this group might have an opportunity to build up the workforce, especially in this another topic, but also bring in some of the underrepresented communities into the training throats for which HPC is required.
So that's a hand raise, yeah?
Yes. Since Chandra took a stage, I'm going to ask you about DA consortium that has been announced a couple months ago. Can you explain more about the consortium, about the DA? Who's going to lead that?
Is that for you or for John?
I think it is John, because it is not the J, it is not JTTI, it is EPIC. It is under the EPIC part. So I let John answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really say much at this point, but you know, the announcement is closed now, so we received some applications. But to the comment that was made earlier, I was gonna raise my hand because, you know, that consortium has a requirement for a certain amount of funding going to MSIs and HSIs, which is great. I think it's going to do a lot for workforce development and training the next generation of DA scientists. The challenge has always been HPC, is how do we get, we started those conversations within NOAA, how do we get HPC for the consortium? And it's, so far it has been a challenge even through EPIC to be able to get HPC for folks that are working you know, in universities outside, because there's so many requirements for the folks inside of NOAA for HPC. So it continues to still be a challenge, but we're very excited about the consortium, and we're able to talk more about that in the coming months. Well, it's a single grant over several years. Yeah.
I'm gonna make. I guess a series of questions that I don't have answers to, but you know, there's been a lot of talk about JEDI, but you know, taking a step back and kind of thinking about where we are and looking at some of Daryl's questions, we've made this transition to HAFS, and a lot of it's been good in terms of DA, but we have some challenges, right? And you know, I think one of the big challenges that we have right now is for storms that are, you know, have solid in-storm data and that are, you know, going through maybe rapid intensification. We saw a lot of those over the past few years. We're very fortunate not to have another, only one Gulf storm this year, but they're coming, right? So I guess my question is, are we comfortable where we're at? That maybe we took a little bit of a step back from H4, not doing quite as good with some of that rapidly intensifying stronger storms as we were, and you know, there is a balance here between pushing, you know, this transition to JEDI is a heavy load, right? So how do we balance this, and are we comfortable where we are with HAFS? You know, at what point do we say, okay, we're going to pause? You know, are we going to pause? And at what point does that happen? And when are we comfortable in doing that? I don't have the answers to this, but I'm asking the community because these questions are up there, and I think we need to think about them. NHC. How comfortable are you guys? You guys are the end user, right?
So, I mean, first of all, I'd say that this is like way out of my depth on like what should be our framework going forward with how we're using DA. But obviously, we need to take better advantage of observation constraint. And then also, I think using non-Gaussian methods for data assimilation is pretty important, because we know that we need to make sure we have proper dispersiveness in our ensemble data sets. And so DA kind of goes into that framework as well for ensemble data sets to make sure that we have initial condition uncertainty that's properly being represented through a multitude of different state variables. So
that's not really
So sorry, so I guess what I'm getting at is, let's say we said right now, we're pausing the current DA work within GSI for HAVS, and we're going to push JEDI. And you've seen where we are. What's your gut reaction to that? Or, what, how much, more do we push on this GSI button before we do that pause? Or, what does this look like? And what are you guys comfortable with in kind of that top level framework, not the details of the DA, but just, what you've seen so far from the performance?
I mean, like what we've seen so far is that, if this is kind of the future of how DA should be done properly, then I think we need to move forward towards using newer methods versus putting too much emphasis on just GSI. You can ask.
Oh. Yeah, okay. Matt Underland, the NHC. One thing I've noticed from the forecasters, I'm not one of them, but is if a model stays consistent for a couple of years or a few years, that can be very good because they learn how to use it and what its biases might be if they exist. So if the model has to sit a little longer than it might have, not advance quite as quickly so that a more robust DA system can be built underneath it, I think we could live with that.
Good to hear. I got you. Yeah.
Yeah, to answer Jason's question, Zach from EMC. And so to answer Jason's questions, and of course, we are certainly not satisfied the performance of current GSI. But the issue is we have to move forward and to develop JEDI. That's the goal. So at the same time, we can do like a parallel. We are moving to the JEDI, and at the same time, we can work with the issues we identified from GSI. But it requires the community, the whole community, to help us to do that. Because we only have, like, currently at the EMC hurricane modeling team, we only have 1.5 FTEs for the whole DA development.
Yeah, and I guess, coming from your question, I don't have a clue. How many FTEs is it going to take to get a baseline functionality of JEDI and HAFS? I don't have the answer to that one either. And
we don't know. Yes.
I don't know the answer.
Okay, maybe I ask a question during the part, but forgive me because I'm my first HFIP meeting. What if we change the cadence to 2 years instead of 1 year? Do we really need to update the system every year? Because we have to constrain the human and computing resources, focus more on data simulation while improve the model at the same time, and also save some computing resources.
So I guess a question, first of all, I think we should push forward and try and develop a transition plan. I think we ought to define the requirements and just do it. The question I have is, can we live with all of our DA expertise diving into JEDI and let the DA exist the way it is right now for whatever we upgrade on the model and push full headlong into JEDI development for DA and set that as a higher priority than in physics improvements and model, keep doing what we're doing, but don't step on the gas on those and push them forward until in other words, I think, Daryl, you had on your figure, you were looking at nominally HAFS v3 having JEDI. Okay, so if we set that as our goal and dedicate our resources to get to that, and then whatever else is left, we can push to do HAFS-V2, but we scale back what we're pushing on HAFS-V2 because we know it's got to work with JEDI. To me, that sounds like a reasonable approach. I'm not going to have to implement it, but it sounds reasonable.
I just have a quick comment to that, and Sujan's been waiting too, but I think there are a few specific developments for House V2 that they're already on the shelf already that I think and that you know don't require any, you know, they just require testing, right? You know, running some cycles, seeing what the impact is. Stuff we've heard today, right? I'm not talking about any major developments, right? I think, you know, I think it's worth some marginal amount of effort to do that. But then, yeah, I agree with you.
I think we need kind of at least like a initial jump start, training people to work on JEDI. Because right now we really cannot wait. Professor produce students help us. We don't have enough staff member knows how to code JEDI yet. So this is probably, you know, Daria can help us work with GCSDA to get our staff member, current staff member, whoever want, you know, willing to learn something new, you know, work on that. Then we probably can have more staff come, you know, work on the JEDI code, then make some contribution, more or less. That's all fine. But the current staff just not have those kind of skill to do JEDI development yet.
Yep, I just have some quick comments as someone who's a developer. Oh, this is John Potter Joy from UMD. I think the faster we get through this transition, the better, because it's quite painful having to make decisions on code development without being able to bring these things into, you know, say GSI, because you know it's going to go away. And so we make a lot of decisions that make us, you know, do things outside of like source code development, such as, you know, doing things at the scripting level that we better done, you know, like you know, for the actual source code. And I think it, you know, the developers are in a weird place right now for DA in the US, and I think the faster we go through this transition, the better. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I feel stuck in purgatory right now, actually. But first, Wallace, and there were a few other comments. Yep, Wallace made a comment about how NAC didn't have a good enough feel for costs and benefits to make such a decision. This is circling back to the pause. But if the intended benefits of a pause would expect in a result of a step function or major improvement, of course, there's a discussion to be had. Shuguang, you had a hand raised?
Yeah, so this is related to, I think, Frank and also Xue-Jin's comments. I think one question is JEDI is really part of UFS? If that's the case, what kind of community level support to JEDI we as a community should expect? Because the amount of support will be critical for us to not you know, from a GCSD group to involve on the JEDI development. I think that question I'm not clear about. Is there any community level support from the GCSDA? Basically, if we have questions, you know, who is going to address that questions when we start to implement something on JEDI?
So the answer to your first question is yes. JEDI is the agreed to unified data assimilation infrastructure for the UFS. The answer to your second question is more complicated. Okay. And I think there's a discussion around roles, responsibility, governance with Joint Center core staff and EPIC and how the support function should be resourced. We have a statement that's been made for, there's a need for this. People like myself and Curtis are advocating for this. We do need to figure out this problem if we are going to expect contributions from the community. Totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you are advocating. I think we're all trying to advocate that, and it's going to be more helpful. More people aware of this.
We're getting to the end.
Yeah, I hate to do this, but we're going to have to cut off. I'll take the heat to give you guys 5 more minutes from the hotel.
We'll wrap up.
Can we get a copy of what the group is supposed to
Yes, we will share the transition plan.
Right. I mean, at least we'll have something to look at and see how they made their decisions and we can think about it.
Yeah, so one outcome I wanted from this discussion was agreement that we need something put to paper, largely leveraging and mirroring what we put together for the global and the regional, and then go from there. Use that to identify what we as a community think are the priorities for HAFS, then inform requirements for JEDI development, and then figure out the resources from there.
Aaron, one of the things I would recommend is a tiger team. We need one. If we're going to put this together, that's got to happen pretty quick. I'd also like to recommend that Annette might be involved in helping us put this together. So
We were already talking about transition plan, so we're on the same page.
Yeah, well, Annette is our go-to person, so that's why I want Annette involved. And she's not going to be part of HRD.
So I wanted to personally thank everyone for the discussion, for the organizing group, for allowing me the opportunity, giving me a platform, a little bit of a soapbox, but still I appreciate the conversation. I think it's really important. We want to help just as much as you do. We want to see this succeed. We want to help define. We want to move this forward. So we're looking forward to helping set the priorities and moving this in the right direction. So with that, we've kept people past 6. I think it's time for happy hour dinner. Any last words, Aaron?
Give me 1 second. What is, all right. So I want to echo everything Daryl said from the aspects of everybody's participation. And I also want to thank you for your soapbox. I think this is an extremely useful conversation. Obviously, we're only as good as the information we get into the model. So it's something we absolutely have to do. And Frank, points well taken. Thank you. Appreciate it. And all of your years of experience with all of this. That said, please, everybody have a good night. And if you're traveling, safe travels. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 8:40. Parking, same as yesterday, just leave. If the gate's not up, push the button and tell them you're with HFIP. They are not doing what they told us they would do with the tickets. So